And the only people we know who disagree with that are consultants for some TV networks. And they're getting heavily paid to disagree with this. None of these scientists are paid for their research. They're doing their research as part of their normal job at a university. So it looks like this increase correlates perfectly with the increase in fossil fuel consumption, and there's no other way of explaining what's going on. There's nothing that has been missed after now about 50 years of research, because this research really began in the 1950s, accelerated in the 70s, and through the 90s and into today has been the work of thousands and thousands of people. There's really no basis for arguing that human activity, and when we produce 25% of greenhouse gases in our country, we're 3% of the world's population, we produce 25% of greenhouse gases. Our military produces more greenhouse gases than most countries of the world, 2.5% itself. So we produce a lot. So of course, and psychologically, nobody wants to admit they're wrong. We all have these defense mechanisms, and they've been linked to survival. It's hard to say, I was wrong. We want to find some way where we didn't have perfect information, or actually you misunderstood us, or some way of shading it so that we don't look bad. But we're wrong. We've made a mistake here, and we need to correct it, because only we can correct it. Only we can reduce this. And that means changing away from fossil fuels. We know exactly what to do. We know it'll be inconvenient. We know that it's not always going to be easy for everybody, but we know exactly what to do. Next slide. And this is I was talking about 650,000 years. This is 650,000 years of data, and look what's happened as a result of fossil fuels. We've moved outside of all the measures for greenhouse gases from the past 650,000 years. We have moved the world outside this. Next slide. So the report concludes the increase they use a scientific language. They say it's a 90% probability, because scientists can never say 100%. So they say 90%, which is their highest level of confidence that something caused something. If you fall off, if I hit the ground rather than the ceiling when I jump, it's like 90% likely that it's gravity. So it's 90% likely that it's because of our fossil fuel burning. Next slide. And here's what's happened. We're down here. And if we continue on the trend that we're currently on, we are going to be up here. That means that by 2100, and I suspect there could even, that's one generation now away. People are living, we're going to have the largest population of people over 100 in history in the next few years here in the United States. So people are living to be a century. And in that lifetime, in the span of a single lifetime, we could move the world not just beyond this 2-degree change. So for 20,000 years, we've lived within a 1-degree fluctuation. The temperature has never moved outside of that 1-degree band that I showed you, that blue band. We know that historically it has moved out as far as 2 degrees. We're on a course for pushing it out to 4 degrees. 4 degrees, people say they cannot even model the scale of storms, drought, or heat waves that would be associated with a 4-degree temperature change. Already at 2 degrees, they're predicting that our planet will be unlike anything we've ever known. So we clearly want to move off this trajectory that we're on. We clearly, and we could move on to this trajectory. We could stabilize it. We have enough time to stabilize this, to change things. Next slide, please. But we have to do something. If we don't, all of these problems, right now, they're saying all these problems that we're seeing are going to worsen. There's no stabilization of these problems. They will get worse and worse and worse until they reach what scientists call a tipping point. The tipping point will be the point at which our models no longer can predict what is going to happen. We don't know what will happen at that point. What they suspect is if we hit a tipping point, life will not be very congenial to most species. The climate will not be congenial to most species. Next slide, please. So, if we don't change, severe weather events, dramatic changes in microbial activity and disease outbreaks, massive flooding, massive water scarcity, changes in the supply and demand for food and energy, causing economic disruptions that economists can't model. We can model the natural changes. We don't yet know how to model the social changes. So they just say massive disruptions. Is that a global depression? Nobody knows. Massive food shortages, disease outbreaks, mass population movements, and government confusion. This is going to place high demands. It already is placing high demands on those. The reason we send our military out is because we have no one else to send. We don't have a citizen Peace Corps that we can send. If there's a disease outbreak, what's our plan in this country for a bird flu? If there's an outbreak of bird flu, we will send our military. That's our only plan, because that's the only place where we have thousands of people who are prepared to leave the next day to go and do something. Those are the only people in our country we can send abroad. We send them abroad because we have nobody else. And we send them abroad, earthquake today, storm flood tomorrow, disease outbreak, crime, war. We send them out, these guys 18 to 20 years old, to deal with things they're not trained to deal with. What we need, of course, is some sort of citizen Peace Corps that we can send our talent out there who want to deal with these problems and who can understand these problems. Because we're using the wrong tool, and we're using it more and more often because the problem is getting worse and worse. And there's going to be famine, there's going to be need to distribute food, to help people who are moving, to build shelter, temporary housing, permanent housing. All these needs are getting more and more acute, and the number is enormous. When 20 million people move, as they did in Bangladesh during that summer, that's a lot of people. When you have when desertification starts to move people, they need think of when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, about 3.5 million people moved into northern Pakistan. Pakistan had no strategy for dealing with that many people. That's a lot of people. They moved into, I've been to several of the refugee camps there. They moved into these areas, and they had no strategy for housing or energy or water or waste management or food supply. They were at a loss what to do. We're just going to see more and more of those situations. Next slide. So we're already facing large-scale threats, and we're in danger of watching our sort of position, our capacity, our capital, human capital, military capital, financial capital, sort of disappear if we don't try and get to the roots of the problem. Next slide. So the last thing I want to do is I want to show you, these are the parts of the world that are already experiencing water scarcity, all through Central America, Africa, the Middle East, South Asia, and that's the part of the world which are in the front lines of climate change. Those are the parts of the world where the situation is going to get intensely worse over the next 20 years. Next slide. One of our projects, so we've been working in northern Pakistan for about 10 years, and I work mostly in this area from Peshawar up to Gilgit. So I work in this area. So it's a volatile area and an area of concern, and I'll show you a few slides of it. Oh, that's me. This is me in the area. I look so different. But it was me, and this is a checkpoint you go through. There's only this one road. Next slide. There's only this one road that goes from Peshawar up to Gilgit. One road, and this is the road. And so these big trucks, heavily laden trucks, all the trade is, people and goods and everything is in these trucks, which move so slowly, people actually walk alongside them. Next slide. And you can see, look at this road. There's a typical, at one point I counted 38 hairpin curves. And I was in a Toyota Land Cruiser. Next slide. So you look at the road. This is the road that we're on. This was a point where my driver said to me, I'm not sure if I can get the car around this corner, so get out, because cars fall off the road. They tumble down. And they tumble down thousands of feet. So driving accidents, by the way, are increasing dramatically throughout the developing world as a cause of death and severe injury. And part of the reason is they don't have the infrastructure. As they get more and more motorcycles and cars, they don't have the infrastructure for it. Next slide. Typical truck, heavily overpacked. So anything that goes wrong, it's poised to tumble. But what I wanted to show you is the communities. Next slide. Here's a typical settlement. Now you look where this is positioned. This area, the Dir Kostan, Peshawar Valley, inhabited for thousands, tens of thousands of years. This is a very old civilization. But their whole world, their environment is eroding around them.